service, mode of activity that connects one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in devotion, and that way one can understand him, because through devotional service only can he be understood. So we're as far as text 23. There's 55 verses in this chapter. We spent some time discussing how he became Prahlada and how he came to the position of offering prayers, his life and the preamble to his prayers. And then the first 7 verses were his exchange with the goddess of fortune and Lord Brahma and the various demigods. They were afraid of this angry feature of Lord Nrsingadev. We discussed about transcendental anger. What's that? Transcendental people aren't supposed to be angry. They're supposed to be shanti. And how you can be angry and peaceful at the same time. So we discussed the spiritual perspective of the Lord and his devotee and the process of devotional service. He began his prayers with humility, expressions of humility, naturally so, stating his disqualification, the much superior qualification of his superiors. I don't know how it's going to be possible for me to pacify you, to even offer prayers. Then, anyway, so we've heard lots of messages from Prahlada about entering into the prayer itself, his wish to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead withdraw his anger, understanding that anger is meant for the non-devotees, and they've already been vanquished. And so your devotees are feeling afraid, although they shouldn't feel afraid, because that anger is meant for others, and the nature of the Lord in relation to the devotee is very gentle and affectionate and kind. And in various ways, we'll hear continuing in this section, how the miseries of material existence are removed, not just diminished, but removed by the bhakti process, and other methods are not successful in doing that. The nescience of the living entity is removed by bhakti, and other processes aren't effective in removing nescience, because the root of nescience is ignoring Krishna, and then other sub-nesciences come from that. Variegated ignorance comes, and from ignorance comes suffering. And so the influence of material existence, the influence of his being born in demoniac ancestry, family, that can also be checked. The solution to everything, he's teaching in various ways. He's expressing in the form of prayers, but teaching that bhakti is the solution. And so he's praying to Lord Nrsingadev for instructions in the ways of devotional service, so that he can take shelter. And when will you take me to your lotus feet, out of this cycle of birth and death, the crushing wheel of time? And so his eyes are on the Supreme Lord. His mood is the mood of devotion. He's very clear why, and there isn't some alternative. Exclusive Shuddha Bhakti. So now we're going to be, this evening, hearing verses 23, 4, and 5. The themes of these verses have to do with his clear understanding of the temporary nature of those who wish attainment of power, position, heaven. Everything is all destroyed. I saw it with my father. He was on top of the universe, and in a moment it was all gone. So he's there's detachment in his devotion. There's no one of Lord Chaitanya's dear associates, Jagatananda Pandit, he was in the picture that we saw of listening to Gadadhar Pandit speaking the Bhagavatam. Jagatananda wrote, don't make the mistake, dear devotees, don't make the mistake of trying to cross a river with one foot in two different boats. Put both feet in one boat, the boat of bhakti, to cross over the river of material existence. So this feature of time is mentioned. Time destroys everything. Not bhakti. We were hearing a whole lot about timelessness and ultimate liberation, all those things. So he wants freedom from the powerful influence of time, and for that he wants the association of Narada. So he doesn't want any of these temporary benefits. He wants Narada's association, and with Narada's association, this detachment becomes complete. So we'll hear some more about that. Those that don't have that association, those living in the material world, hoping for some future happiness through fruitive activities, he's very sad to see their plight. And the philosophers and so-called scientists that Maya Pratigyana, their knowledge is stolen by illusion. They're unable to control their senses. They run after happiness like water in a mirage in a desert. He's very compassionate. He sees very clearly. And of course, those that see clearly, they want to do something. So that's coming next. So we're going to be discussing 23, 24, 25. You see on the screen here, here's the Sanskrit. Here's the translation for verse 23. My dear Lord, people in general want to be elevated to the higher planetary systems for a long duration of life, opulence, and enjoyment. But I have seen all of these through the activities of my father. When my father was angry and he laughed sarcastically at the demigods, they were immediately vanquished simply by seeing the movements of his eyebrows. Very powerful. More powerful than the rulers of the heaven, what to speak of denizens of heaven. Yet, my father, who was so powerful, has now been vanquished by you within a moment. So I don't want these temporary, flickering pleasures. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, and it's true, people, we discussed this, people believe their interest in religion largely is prospering in this life and going to heaven in the next life. But whatever that existence is in the heavenly planet, it's all destroyed either after that lifetime or ultimately at the time of annihilation. Prabhupada explains this in the purport. It's all temporary, and whatever benediction Hiranyakashipu got from Lord Brahma, that was also vanquished in just a moment by the personality of Godhead. So whatever the position in this world, it's this mixture of happiness and distress. And we don't want the distress, and even the happiness is distressful, we heard Prahlada describe. The means to get that happiness is very troublesome, and the happiness is gone, and then we feel sad that it's gone, it's a place of lamentation. I don't want it. He's detached. Prahlada Maharaj did not give any importance to anything in this material world, nor can one maintain his body or material achievements forever. A Vaishnava can understand that nothing within this material world, not even that which is powerful, opulent, or influential, can endure. At any time, here's time again, such things may be vanquished. Time I am, the destroyer of all things. We saw this verse from Bhagavad Gita. And who can vanquish them? The Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is a drawing of one universe, and from the bottom up to the top of the universe, there's the abode of Lord Brahma, and there's the hellish planets at the bottom, and in between the Bhumandala and Svarga and the other upper planetary systems, all temporary. Prahlad has absolute detachment from asat because he has absolute attachment for Sat, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And to get there is the association of his devotee. So, Nija Bhritya Parshvam. He has Narada's association. He wants continued association of Narada. Translation of this verse: my dear Lord, Tasmad is therefore. Now I have complete experience concerning the worldly opulence, mystic power, longevity, and other material pleasures enjoyed by all living entities, from Lord Brahma down to the ant. He's a 5-6-year-old boy, and he's very worldly already. As powerful time, you destroy them all. Kala. Therefore, because of my experience, I do not wish to possess them. My dear Lord, I request you to place me in touch with your pure devotee and let me serve him, Nija Bhritya Parshvam, as a sincere servant. He could ask the Supreme Lord for anything. He doesn't want anything except this one thing: service, the servant of the servant. So, a theme, if you've noticed, so here's an image you've seen before already. The time factor, or time energy, or simply time. Wonderful topic. According to Baladev Vidyabhusan, our principal commentator of the Bhagavad Gita, it's one of the 5 essential topics of Bhagavad Gita, and it's most mysterious of the 5. There's the Supreme Lord, the living entity, material nature, karma, and time. Time brings things into being. Time, when time energy is withdrawn, the entire cosmic manifestation is withdrawn because it moves on the power of time. If you want to be Lord Vishnu, you have to have some time energy. And you can kick off creation by time energy, and you can withdraw creation by withdrawing time energy, and it's pull the plug. And the whole thing collapses back to Pradhan. It stays in this undifferentiated totality of material energy state, just waiting for the next time energy to come and zap it and start it up again. And during the course of cosmic manifestation, time is essential to bring things into being and to withdraw things, of course, in between maintenance of those things. But time energy not only destroys, it brings things into being, and then in time destroys. So those things that are of that temporary nature, Prahlada is saying, no thanks. I've experienced it. I've seen it. We've also seen it. We haven't seen Hiranyakashipu get smashed by Lord Nrsingadev, but we've seen anything that comes into being goes out of being. So in the language of Srimad Bhagavatam or Chaitanya Charitamrita, the happiness of bhukti or sense gratification, the happiness of liberation or siddhi, mystic powers, bhukti mukti siddhi kami sakale ashanta, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says. The devotee is not interested in achieving these things. These are material desires. Prahlad rejects them all. What does he want? He wants Narada's association. He wants guidance under a pure devotee. That's how he got to that position. And now that one is in that position, and impersonal is you reject, but not the devotee. I want the ongoing guidance of Narada and persons like him, persons of such quality that have no interest in things that are temporary. I want guidance from such persons. This Sanskrit is Nija Britya Parshvam, the last phrase in the verse, association of your faithful servant. And I put a pan scale here because when you put on that side of life, then comes this detachment, complete detachment, completely rejection of everything that's temporary. You invest fully in Sat, and Asat is gone. You become absorbed. It's the same, Bhagavad Gita chapter 5. What is called renunciation is the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme. For no one can become renounced factually without attachment to the Supreme. Therefore, yoga system means detachment or becoming disengaged from finding happiness through fruitive activities and the fruits of those fruitive activities and the enjoyer of the temporary. So to assist this, I had somebody that knows how to do graphic design a little bit, make a little, two diagrams actually, a seesaw. There's a seesaw. There's the fulcrum of the seesaw, that's the mind. And then like two children, over here is us, the material existence of us, and over here is the force of instructions, spiritual instructions by the spiritual master and predecessor acharyas. Now, seesaws don't work if the fulcrum isn't well situated. The mind, our friend or enemy, depending, the mind has to be fixed. And there's ways to help the mind become fixed, purified, starting with chanting, Cheto Darpana Marjanam. That's the beginning, and cleansing the mind, and then Bhava Mahat. So becoming freed from by association, by sound vibration, by knowledge, becoming freed from the affinity for the temporary. To the point, we read, now making the fifth reference to this series of verses, chapter 6, verses 20 through 23, the description there in Dhyan Yoga about Samadhi, because it was described that Prahlad had achieved this stage of Samadhi through Lord Nrsingadev's association. Cessation of material existence, Samadhi. And then so that's the mind is steady. It takes a while. But we practice. to make the mind steady. To make the mind pure, then it becomes steady. Fixed upon the Supreme, it becomes steady. And then in that steady mind state, or as we become steady, these instructions act to press this side down. So what happens when, in the seesaw, one side the child pushes down and the other side goes up? One becomes then elevated. So here's a simplified version of the same thing. That skinny fellow, that's us. Covered, conditioned soul covered. And then he's on a seesaw, and then there's the mind. Of course, the mind has to become steady, firm, and fixed in determination by sadhana practices and being regulated and being clean and so forth, gradually making the mind firm, resolute in purpose. Then comes some opportunity for hearing spiritual instructions. Great fortune. Now, it doesn't necessarily, you have to wait until your mind is firm and determined before you hear spiritual instructions. But when spiritual instructions are given and the mind is firm, then the consciousness becomes elevated on the force of those spiritual instructions. And as consciousness becomes elevated, then spiritual qualities become decorated by Krishna. He's the decorator. Very simple graphic description of what Prahlada is speaking about. We heard him say, your expansion as the plenary expansion of you has created the subtle bodies of this world. And within the subtle body feature, the mind, there's so many desires, and those so many desires are so disturbing, and they're never to be fulfilled. And free me from those material desires, and there's only one way, bhakti. Somebody's phone. So let's do it again. Yeah? There we are, covered. And we do have a mind, but we need, not, first things first kind of message, but the mind, in the course of for spiritual progress to take place, the mind has to become firm and fixed. And when the firm and fixed mind receives spiritual instructions, then consciousness becomes lifted. And as consciousness becomes elevated, then also spiritual qualities become the decoration of the living entity. And one of these decorations is detachment from the temporary. What should we strive for detachment, or should we strive for devotion? We strive for devotion. And then as that striving for devotion, the impetus for becoming a lover of Krishna or pleasing to Krishna, as that becomes stronger, then we have the bala, the spiritual strength for detachment, not just to say, gee, I should be detached, but I'm attached. So, this image has a dual purpose. It's, understanding, we've been speaking about time, and so how are we using it? And if you have a spiritual goal from spiritual association and good instruction, like Prahlada and his teachings, which he received from Narada and his teachings, then the goal is very clear, not unclear. Read it again and again, and the goal is very clear. So now, what's our goal? What is it that we're living for? Tick, 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 tick. Time is moving. what's your goal? What's your purpose, your mission of life? Now, the dual purpose of the image is, this is a desert. And look in the background and you'll see a mirage. Looks like water. I have another mirage picture. If I looked on the internet for mirage pictures, and I'm not so familiar with deserts. I know what the notion of a mirage is, but taking pictures of a mirage, like taking pictures of a ghost or something, because it doesn't exist. But mirage looks like water. It's a phenomena that looks like what it isn't. It's Maya. It looks like something it's not. So we're looking over this desert-like existence of material realm, and what's your mission when in this material realm? So Prahlada is very clear, and he's giving teachings. He's praying to the Supreme Lord, but he's giving teachings what happiness he wants. Because we want happiness without a doubt. One of the natural things. It's not wrong to want happiness. It's part of the living entity's nature, just as the Supreme Lord is Satchit Ananda Vigraha, unlimited. We're tiny. Satchit Ananda Vigraha, sparks. So we want happiness. It's natural. Nothing unwholesome about wanting happiness. But what is happiness? So he's clear what isn't, what is, and he's going for it through bhakti, and that means the association of Narada. So here's the final verse for this evening. In this material world, every living entity desires some future happiness, which is exactly like a mirage in the desert. Where is water in the desert? Or, in other words, where is there happiness in the material world? As for this body, what is its value? It is merely a source of various diseases. The so-called philosophers, scientists, and politicians know this very well, but nonetheless, they aspire for temporary happiness. Happiness is very difficult to obtain, but because they are unable to control their senses, they run after the so-called happiness of the material world and never come to the right conclusion. Mayaya paritagyana. So here's a desert image and the mirage. Now, science has its way of describing why mirages look like mirages, why illusion looks like something it isn't. So there's a scientific explanation, but for purposes of Prahlada's teachings, looking for happiness in a place where there's no happiness is like looking for water in a desert and thinking it's there in a mirage. It's not there. The nature of a desert is there's no water. The nature of this material world, there is no happiness. Now people will argue, wait a minute. I'm happy. And the nature of senses coming in contact with sense objects that give the sensation that says, according to Bhagavad Gita, that's the place of birth of dukkha. Dukkha yonaya evate. Prabhupada's purport: one cannot stop a blazing fire by constantly pouring ghee upon it. One cannot satisfy oneself by increasing plans for sense enjoyment. So the nature on the left-hand side of looking for happiness is like pouring gasoline, in this case, not ghee, gasoline on fire. Prabhupada gives other examples. Supposing, it's a simple one, supposing somebody has a fever, so instead of Fahrenheit 98.6, they have a fever of, so your child has a fever of 101 or something. So what should you do? Increase the fever, right? Make it 103. No. Make it 0. No. Bring it to 98.6. Yes. So what's the 98.6 position? What's the non-feverish condition of the living entity? The spiritual position. Bring the living entity to the spiritual position. That's the solution to the fever of material existence. Not knowing what the natural state, not having self-realization or even the proper conception of what the nature of the self is, the default position goes over to the sense gratification program. So, foolish people don't understand this. Bhagavad Gita wants us to understand this. Krishna wants us to understand. Those who represent him want us to understand. Prahlada wants his hearers to understand. It's a nice drawing, chapter 15, Bhagavad Gita, the upside-down banyan tree, reflected on the lake of desire. And on the other side of that desire, separate from Krishna, is Krishna, connected with Krishna. So the invitation to all these teachings is not to like spook you or give the material world a bad name or something like that. It's the reality is the spiritual reality. And we're being induced by Krishna and Bhagavad Gita and Prahlada and these teachings to go to Radha and Krishna in the spiritual world. So the conclusion, rather than the material hankering, we have to follow the instructions of Krishna, and then we'll be happy. And to follow the instructions of Krishna, we need guidance of his devotees. Otherwise, we're in this unfortunate position, the material position, where in the name of happiness, we continue lifetime after this Kala Chakra or Samsara Chakra, as Prahlada was speaking. Continue to suffer miserable conditions in material existence. He is offering, back to the language that we've heard so many times already, he's giving us the opportunity for ultimate liberation, not liberation in the sense of negation or cessation of material existence. He's giving us, as the Bhagavatam is giving us in general, this position of eternal activity, swarupena vyavastati, the phrase of the Bhagavatam, the eternal activity of the living entity in the living entity's spiritual form. He's, please take it. Please take it. Please take it. And from so many angles, he's helping us to understand. We read his teachings carefully, what it is that he's offering, why it is that he's offering. If we don't accept it, what the consequences of not accepting it or being a little lazy in accepting it and continuing with the mixed program. Well, little in moderation. Little story, and I'll end. Once upon a time, I was a little boy. And when I was a little boy, my father moved from some place to another place. The whole family moved. And when we moved from one place to the other place, my parents were involved in the local church, Presbyterian church. So they contacted the Presbyterian church in the new place, and the minister came to visit us. The whole family pay a house visit to this new family that's going to be part of the congregation. It's just how pastoral counseling is done. You just do that. So they came. He came. And, as in we offered, some water. He was offered, what would you like? Would you like some coffee or tea or wine? And he chose wine. And I was little, but I remember visibly my sisters and brother were like, whoa, he's a priest and he's drinking wine. And so they asked him, is it okay for a priest to drink wine? And he said, in moderation. Now, I was this little boy. And I thought, in moderation? In moderation? Then in moderation, it's okay if he mixes with another man's wife. In moderation. I was just little. What did I know about life? Sure enough, some years later, they had to run the guy out of town because he was mixing in moderation with other men's wives. So, devotees, we should, if there's something that is to be done, do it regularly, and something that's not to be done, we don't do it in moderation. Because moderation easily leads to excess, and it's just not to be done. So things that are favorable for bhakti, we accept. Things that are not conducive to bhakti, with a big smile, no thanks. In America, they stopped serving meals on flights, but in India, even if it's a short flight, they serve a whole meal. I mean, some of the airlines have stopped that, but many still continue. So the lady comes down, the stewardess, and veg or non-veg. No, thank you. Well, would you like some non-veg? No, thank you. I'll take some water. You sure? Yeah, I'd like some water. Okay. Because, anyway, we have as devotees, we have our way of life, and our way of life is Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita says, we take only that which is offered to Krishna, and well, you can offer our vegetable, who knows what's in there, and who knows the consciousness of the person who cooked it, and that gets transferred in the cooking, and I don't want to offer that to Krishna, so no thanks. I brought my own. Would you like some? I brought some. Here, I have a baked samosa. Would you like one? Oh, thank you. Otherwise, miserable conditions in the name of happiness. In the name of happiness. Miserable conditions. It's not scare tactics, it's compassion. Prahlada wants to give us real happiness, unmixed with the pleasure and the pleasures, so-called pleasures, and that allure us to the position of attachment to the temporary, thus forgetting who we really are and our relationship with Krishna. We just, the whole Maya situation, we no thanks. Is there an alternative? Yes. He's giving us the alternative. He's demonstrating it by his actions, and he's teaching us by his words, that it's all in the form of these beautiful prayers. So we'll continue tomorrow morning. Wonderful lesson, very important. Protection. happiness, freedom. Compassion, spiritual qualities through spiritual instructions of qualified persons, in this case, Prahlada Maharaj. So, any comments or questions from anyone? He's back there. He's got one back there. Okay.
Maharaj, you were talking about giving this example of keeping two different feet in two different boats.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, when this change is made, or the desire is there to change, to put the feet in the spiritual boat, is it that there's a change of activity that also happens along with the change of consciousness?
Yes, the change of consciousness, not the activity per se. You're married, you have 2 children. It's not that now you're Krishna conscious, abandon your children because it's Maya. They're products of Maya. You're just attached to Maya. So it's not, we don't abandon the activity, we abandon the attachment. We take up in Krishna consciousness activities in service to Krishna consciousness. So the consciousness behind the activity is to change. The purpose for the activity changes. Now, if there's something that just cannot be offered to Krishna, that you leave to the side. Okay?
Thank you.
Over here.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. There was something you said that disturbed me a little.
Oh, good.
You said it's better to strive for devotion than to strive for detachment, right? But
Better to strive for devotion than...
detachment.
Okay.
That's what you said. But I was thinking, like, someone like me who entered the Krishna consciousness from a different background or religion, I feel like the entire reason was because I want devotion of Krishna. I want to be close with God, but also I want to detach from like you said, this material exhaustion, right?
No,
and
wait a minute. That's Queen Kunti. So don't.
Well, I want to detach from the material. Sorry, I'm putting it all together.
Okay.
But it's like, we enter a practice like this because we want to get away from. So I know I'm very young in Krishna conscious, but that is my aim, to detach, to get away,
Sure. Sure. Classic. And it's, there's a verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says that. 4 types of people. Chatur vidha bhajante mam. 4 types of people, bhajante mam, engage in my devotional service. And one of them is you. It's nasty out there, and I want to get away from that nastiness. Please, Krishna, give me shelter. So it's a motivation. It's an impetus. It's one of the 4 vidhas, 4 categories of, as in the beginning. And it's not wrong. It's natural, universal. Now, let's go down the path of detachment. It can make the heart hard. And then supposing, the source of the misery and the feeling of the misery, at least, subsides. So now my impetus is less. Or supposing I just keep going and my heart gets harder and harder and harder and harder. Nothing can get in because my heart's harder. I don't want that misery. I got the steel wall around me. Detachment wall.
But then when you chant, your heart softens.
Yes, it does.
So it's a balance, right?
And therefore, no, it's not just the balance. The heart becomes hard and soft at the same time. The purpose changes.
Yeah.
It needs to change. It must change. Detachment is there. We were discussing this yesterday. Detachment is there. Snehavali was describing. There's a verse in the Bhagavatam that says, from bhakti causelessly come knowledge and detachment. So if the motivation, the primary motivating factor moves, it's encouraged that it should, from I want to get away from this misery and this toxic thing out here, bad association, etc. This Prahlada is saying bad association. The means is bhakti. And when bhakti is there, then there's detachment, whether you're in this association of something that's toxic. I'll give a little example. During the time that I became a devotee, the people of my generation, it's not totally different today, but the people of my generation, it was drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And so, and it led to a certain degradation of qualities of and mind and intelligence and motivation and everything from people that just got involved in those things. Life became really fuzzy. So I became a devotee that long, And one of the first things that happened when I became a devotee is we went on Harinam Sankirtan to a rock concert where there's drugs, sex, and rock and roll, abundant. And I was wondering, gee, what's that going to be like? But it was interesting that there wasn't repulsion, nor was there attraction. It was just, wow, here's the holy name and Harinam Sankirtan, and we're giving prasadam. We gave prasadam and gave books and gave the holy name. It was fantastic. Another kind of happiness than the aversion, protection kind of position, or the indulgence. We were protected because of that immersion in bhakti and giving bhakti. I mean, it certainly wasn't the highest level of bhakti, just because it knew bhakti going on Harinam. But you've had that experience in Harinam in New York. And it's an oasis in the middle of the desert. And it's, the meeting people isn't like, oh, I'm going to have some fun having some social interaction with people. It's bhakti. So, that leads to detachment, a more enduring detachment than, get away from it all. Vairagya, jnana and vairagya, knowledge and detachment are naturally byproducts. They arise ahoituki, without cause. They just arise by that immersion in bhakti. Now, back to your statement, there may be I want to distance myself from that toxicity and that pain and chaos, and I don't want to have to navigate that territory. I want detachment from it. It comes from bhakti. And one who becomes experienced in bhakti understands it. It doesn't mean now I leave my guard down and I go do anything and hang out with anybody in any situation, and it's, I'm immune. I'm like that little story of Prabhupada saying, I'm always praying to Krishna. But so that protection is there by consciousness, And then I may be in a place where people are doing drug, sex, and rock and roll, and it's not attractive. Another Prabhupada story. I like this one. I heard this one from Satsrup Maharaj. There was a time when from 26 Second Avenue, Prabhupada would send devotees here and there to start something. He sent one devotee to go start a center at a university, because one man came to 26 Second Avenue and said, I'll provide you the maintenance for a center at this university if you just send somebody. So he sent somebody, and he sent Satsrup Maharaj to Boston to start, because colleges, it was part of Prabhupada's strategy. Center in Boston for so many colleges in Boston. So Prabhupada came from somewhere by plane, and so there were no cars. The devotees didn't have cars, so he got in a taxi. So the taxi driver is driving, Prabhupada's in the back seat, Satsrup Maharaj is next to him in the back seat, and it's one of these taxi drivers that wants to talk. So that, looking over his shoulder instead of the road, saying, so, you're one of them swamis, huh? That mean you fly on carpets and you lie on a bed of nails, or, what's your program? Swami? Prabhupada said, better than that. Oh, what's better than that? He said, Satsrup Maharaj said, Prabhupada said, I can be in a room full of naked women and not be agitated. And the man went, oh. And Satsrup Maharaj's comment was, I don't know how the taxi driver was processing what Prabhupada said. Like, that's what he does. He goes into roomfuls of naked women and tests his endurance or something. But detachment from the number one attraction of material life is sex attraction. Detachment. How? By bhakti. So that's our message. The sustainable detachment is when there's shelter in bhakti, at Krishna's lotus feet, engaging his loving service in the association of devotees who are hearing and chanting the glories of Krishna. It transports us to another realm where detachment is a subset. Like that seesaw example, or the pan scale. Total, abject disinterest in the temporary of all varieties. Through bhakti, to that association, bhakti arises and becomes stronger. So something else? Yes?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. We consider ourselves as a product of mercy. So my question is, what should we do to attract the mercy of the Lord?
What did we do, or what can we do?
What should we do?
What did we do?
What should we do?
What should we do? Oh. Bhagavatam verse that is Shrinvanti, Gayanti, Grananti, Sadhavaha. We come to that source where there's spiritual teachings, particularly Srimad Bhagavatam, spiritual teachings that we should hear, Shrinvanti, Gayanti, speak and vibrate, and Grinanti, bring within our heart. And that when one does that, then it attracts mercy. A nice example of this principle is when how Narada describes in his previous life, he was an obscure nobody, and he, through good fortune, providential arrangement, there was the association of sadhus, bhakti vedantas is the language in the Bhagavatam. And when the bhakti vedantas saw that Narada had the quality that he liked to hear, and he liked to be doing some service, and he was not frivolous and so forth, and they felt compassion. Naturally, they felt compassion towards him, and in addition to just their own discussions, and he was hearing those discussions which he brought inside, they invited them to speak more, and they gave him further instructions and he received it, and it transformed him. So, sincerely inquire, and of those things that one hears, then you bring them into your heart and live by them. Like this illustration, then consciousness will go up, and when consciousness goes up, Krishna will decorate with one with spiritual quality, spiritual qualification, and that's very pleasing. Prabhupada was very happy to see disciples that would apply the process of Krishna consciousness and become happy. And the opposite is when they would struggle or go away, he became very unhappy. He would cry sometimes when someone who he held as very dear to him, who had become a devotee, went away. There's examples of this. So pleasing is sincerely hear, sincerely apply, and become happy. That'll attract mercy.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Guru Maharaj, if you could present the seesaw slide, the living entity on the seesaw.
What? Do you want to look at it again?
I have a question on that.
You have a question on it, okay.
Where you mentioned first is cleansing the mind through Chatudarpanam process, and that gives a spiritual elevation.
Yeah. What's your question?
My question is, when there is cleaning happens in the mind, how does it impact to the soul itself?
I don't understand your question. Could you say it in a different way? What's the relationship between mind and the well-being of the soul?
Yes,
that's what you want to know?
Yeah.
Well, read carefully Bhagavad Gita. It'll help you understand how the mind can be your best friend or the greatest enemy. Because in yoga, what the mind does, whatever the system of yoga is, what the mind does is very important. And the mind is the repository place of desire or conceptions of life. And commonly people follow the conceptions of life. And, the taint is, I want to enjoy. And then there's variations on the theme. And that's where the mind is the greatest enemy. And when that tendency of the mind is checked, there's this detachment message over here, and then, but beyond that is purified, then it's the mind takes shelter of Krishna's pleasure, bhakti yoga. All the other systems of elevation are to help to get the mind to that position. So, let's just take, that's a logistic description or a technical description. Let's take the practical activity of chanting. In this age of Kali, the primary benediction for living entity is associating with Krishna directly, even we're totally unqualified, by his mercy through making himself available to us through his holy name. But if the mind is elsewhere, we're not getting the benefit of Krishna's association. So it's necessary for the mind to go to Krishna to get the benefit of his association. You can be in his association and be distracted. You can be in his association and be offensive. So where the mind goes is very important. And that the primary everyday practice is chanting the holy name. Every day. 25,000 opportunities by chanting 16 rounds to be in Krishna's association. And it's not that you're in the association through sound, but the mind has to go there. And we'll find the mind will not go there unless we want to go there, and that's the soul wanting to be in our relation with Krishna. Then gradually the purification of the mind can become strengthened, so the mind will also go there. So that's the soul wanting. It's dormant, but then the mantra awakens the desire of the soul to be in service to Krishna. The mind has to cooperate. It's not optional. It's a must. It's imperative. For the soul to be in relation with Krishna, the mind has to go to Krishna. The intention establishes attention.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Yes. Over here in the front.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. My question is about sacrifice. What is the meaning of the word yajna or sacrifice?
What's the meaning of sacrifice?
Yeah. And I'm also in terms of Nam Yajna, that how we say that for us is hearing and chanting, or primarily the process of hearing. And I want to understand what sacrifice means and how does it attract the mercy of the Lord?
How does it
attract the mercy of the Lord?
Uh-huh. Nice question. As far as I know, the etymology of the word sacrifice is connected to rendering something sacred, something that's of this world. You bring it to the position of rendering it sacred, and it's the act of rendering it sacred is the act of sacrifice. It's what's yajna by Vishnu, offering to Vishnu, that sacrifice. And so, just take this example of the mind. Make the mind sacred by bringing the mind and offering to Vishnu. Now you can make the, anyway. So the act of sacrifice of, let's say, in karma yoga, the sacrifice of the fruits of one's work, that's a common phrase we find in Bhagavad Gita and devotional teachings. So what is it? I mean, how you do it is one thing, but there's all these verses in Bhagavad Gita, some sacrifice this way, that way, the other way, the other way. But the principle restored again is the principle of sacrifice. So to render sacred that which is seen as disconnected from the Supreme, connected to the Supreme by the act of offering to the Supreme. It's a consciousness. Then there's forms that vary from one tradition to another tradition, but the principle is offering to the Supreme. It's like palmfuls of Ganges offered to the Ganges. Krishna doesn't need anything. Everything is from him and is in him and of him. He doesn't need anything. So the act of sacrifice is to offer to him what is his with devotion. So that's therefore the sacrifice becomes bhakti for us. And then it takes different forms. And so our sacrifice is sacrifice of the hearing process through sound, principle sacrifice. And then vibrating helps us in the hearing process, so we chant, chanting and hearing. That's our principle, Sankirtan Yagya. Okay? Anything further? We're done? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.